gosh. Okay. Hey, y'all. We're on chapter 5. I just got a comment on my TikTok and someone was like, it's probably dyslexia. And that's what I'm thinking. While I'm fucking reading this book right here, I promise, I swear to God, I think I have a learning disability. But it's okay. It's demure. Stop. Chapter 5. The Atlantic, that was a good intro, wasn't it? The Atlantic, damn. No, but I actually do think it might be something, because, like, sometimes I do have difficulties reading, and I'm like, what's up with my brain? Like, what the fuck is going on? The Atlantic slave trade and African labor. 15th century Portugal, because Portugal wasn't real. Alana, sorry. The singularly ambitious historical agent one encounters. Oh, and sometimes the only reason I do well in some parts of, like, reading, it's because I'm re-recording. Mind you, I'm re-recording this part. I already read this book already, but I'm re-recording. I deleted it. Anyways, Portugal, the singularly ambitious historical agent one encounters in countless scholarly studies, is a metaphor. It is, as we have already seen, largely a convenience, an appropriately deceptive categorical reference to what in actuality was a mixture of political and economic forces, both national and supranational in origins. The term Portugal, while symbolizing a nation, has as well obscured these forces and their significance for what was a little nation of less than 1 million people. Moreover, Portugal was to play a critical role in exploiting the transfer of African labor to the New World. Consequently, for those concerned with the slave trade and its ultimate significance for Black people, a better understanding of the Portuguese nation is imperative. This is so, as I shall argue, because the same but not identical interests and dynamics that slowly formed Portugal into an important pawn in the chessboard of European history were also implicated in the transformation of African labor into capital. So that's the most important. You know, when you're reading and, like, you have to find, like, what is this saying? That things that helped me, like, because and I do have difficulties in school. I ain't gonna lie to you. Like, it's all, whenever you look at the first paragraph, that's going to tell you, this is my argument. Like, I feel like y'all know this, but I'm just saying it out loud. But this is the argument, like, and this is the important part right here, is the Portuguese and the transformation of African labor into capital. Like, that's this paragraph that's highlighted. It's the first couple sentences and the last couple sentences. That's what this chapter is going to tell us about. You know what I mean? Like, that's, like, you know how you, like, you know when you have, like, different little things that you do to, like, help you with reading, help you with comprehension, help with understanding. Those are that's, like, one of those things that I do for myself. But I feel like a lot of people do this too. Like, I feel like this is not, like, new information, like, on how to read. You know what I mean? But that's, like, especially with books like this, it's, for me, what's helped is, like, okay, the beginning chapter, what is it trying to tell me, and then, like, how do you answer the who, what, where, why, how, whatever. Also, I made cookies. Chocolate chip. They're really good. I get that when I'm done. For this reason, it is worth our time to review and identify these elements as they appeared in Portugal's history. There were several very real agencies whose interests and activities have been glorified as Portugal's national concerns in the general histories of the modern Western Academy. Too often, however, the nature and identities of those agencies have been inadvertently disguised by the rather grander levels of generalization that have accompanied the search to capture their ethos. For some students of the era, the motives for European expansion were material and physical, and then ... as, like, this is, like, an example. What Western Europe needed in the 14th and 15th centuries, Wallerstein writes, was food and fuel. Brudal, on the other hand, has suggested that Western Mediterranean overpopulation was the key to expansion. There were also those who have argued, like Livermore, that the motivation was organizationally systemic, that the militaristic machinery of the Reconquista required new targets of opportunity if they were not to be turned inward. Others, as we have noted earlier, with more attention to ideology, have supposed the real issue was the defeat of the Muslims and the revitalization of Christendom. No single such explanation seems entirely correct or sufficiently specific, though all have been persuasively presented. The result is that at the grand level of reconstruction, the analysis of 15th century Portugal and its historical role would appear to have no satisfactory measure for distilling this multiplicity of needs, actors, and historical forces. Still, though their numbers might be confusing, reconstruction of the actual power relations between these actors may simplify the task of their identification and assessment. One generally unrecognized but crucial relationship when we speak in strictly political terms involved a relatively weak but native feudal ruling class and its more powerful extra-national ruling class allies. Specifically, this amounted to an alliance between Portugal's House of Avis, with its neo-dynastic nobility and bourgeoisie, and a strain of capitalist aristocracy that had been bred in England by war and civil war, political chaos, and economic worth. You know, I used to say chaos like Chacos. Yeah. And economic recession, and a close connection to an emerging British bourgeoisie. And, like, this is a really interesting theme that I've been seeing throughout the book, is how, like, the formation of capitalism, we think about, like, you know, with capitalism, you think about this thing that's just there, right? However, or that these markets are in competition, or there's not necessarily an interrelatedness between them. And I really like how this is, like, reconstructing and seeing how capitalism emerged over time, one, but two, seeing that these capitalistic forces that seem to be, like, separated entities, like the British and the Portuguese, the British in Spain, and this and that and the third, were isolated from each other rather than seeing them and then this book is, like, constructing or retelling or recounting how these forces kind of, like, kissed and canoodled and was making up and macking on each other, pretty much. Yep. In 15th century England, Poston had surmised the great breeding season of English capitalism was in the early phases of the Hundred Years' War, the time when the exigencies of royal finance, new experiments in taxation, speculative ventures in wool, the collapse of Italian finance, and the beginning of the new cloth industry all combined to bring into an existence a new race of war financiers and commercial speculators, army purveyors, and wool monopolists. Wool? And isn't that weird how they said that black people, their hair was like wool? Yeah, okay. Historically, the relationship between the maturing ruling class of Portugal and England have been sealed at the end of the 14th century with the Treaty of Windsor in 1386, which secured the Portuguese throne from the ambitions of Castile's monarchy, and was itself closed by the marriage between João, I don't think that's his name, Joao, of Avis, and Philippa of Lancaster, the daughter of John the Gaunt. This alliance was one that the English had believed would ultimately lead to the acquisition of the throne of Castile. The designs of the English on Castile were never fulfilled. The conclusion of the 100 Years' War, with its disastrous results on English territorial interests on the continent, a civil war in England, and Spain's own national vigor at the end of the century, extinguished those interests. But the relationship with Portugal would prove to be one so valuable that it is still celebrated by English historians. In our own century, for example, Carus Wilson has written, Portugal's relations with England are consistently friendly. These two states are naturally disposed to be allies. Since neither of them was on good terms with Castile, there was also kinship between their dynasties, and the men of both countries were born seamen and adventurers. The friendship lasted on in spite of temporary ruptures through acts of violence and changes of dynasty in England. And throughout the 15th century, the provisions made in this Charter of Commerce in the Treaty of Windsor were confirmed, and the kings of both centuries were pledged to punish infractions of it. As C.R. Boxer would have it, these Portuguese kings, of course, were brain. Sometimes I want to give my brain a nice little, As C.R. Boxer would have it, these Portuguese kings were, of course, half English princes. If you Portuguese, why are you English? You know what I mean? But isn't that interesting? Like, thinking about the way, like, capitalism is now, I mean, well, yeah. You could see how, like, there was an example that I had in my head when I first recorded it, and now it's not in my brain. Dang it. I had a really good example, too. Oh! Elon Musk! Bro, this man is from South Africa apartheid. Sorry, that was a little too dramatic. Elon Musk is from South Africa, an apartheid state. Because why the fuck are there white people in Africa? Right? Because the equator doesn't equate to the manifestation of your skin color, queen. Respectfully, with all love and kindness, but it's because of settlers and colonialism. Right? But Elon Musk is from South Africa apartheid, this racist person, and then he's coming over to America, Tesla, this, that, and the third, blah, 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 blah. Like you see, like, how you can see those types of connections now in terms of, like, the history, the past, and how capitalism was formed, and how this continuously evolving structure, institution, still plays out today, where we still see some, like, similar actors, but different people. Isn't that interesting? Anyways, well, you read that part. As C.R. Boxer would have it, these Portuguese kings, of course, were half English princes. War had brought these two nobilities together. The war machine, how America, like, capitalism, war machine, and how, yeah, unfortunately. Isn't that really interesting, though? War had brought these two nobilities together. War had indeed been the very basis of their existence. War, finally, had so enlarged their political alliance until it achieved what could pass for historical proportions, surviving several centuries despite temporary ruptures. Regardless, in the 15th century, when the necessary conditions for the Atlantic slave trade were being laid down, the link between the emerging bourgeoisie resident in, but not always native to, the two countries provided the basis for a North Atlantic commerce and the mercantilism that would dominate their economies for the next 300 years. This would prove no small matter for the directions in which the slave trade would develop. Okay, I'm going to pause real quick so I can record a show for my sister, and we'll be back. And then it's the Genoese bourgeoisie and the Age of Discovery. Okay.